Welcome to the OhSoSpurs podcast. The clause in the contract of Tottenham captain Heung Min Son has been executed. The 32-year-old star will be staying at our beloved Spurs till at least the summer of 2026. Today we'll be discussing whether we believe the club has made the right call to exercise the option in this deal, if data backs up Son's supposed drop-off in form this season, and what the future holds for the South Korean winger. I'm joined by Elias. How are you, Elias?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you on again. And if you're not familiar with Elias, he's a journalist working closely with some Spurs players in his native country, which we'll probably touch on at the end of this podcast as well. But Elias, there had been whispers that Spurs were going to take up the option in Heung Min Son's deal. What's your initial reaction to the matter?
I feel like in a way it was a no-brainer for us to take up the option. I feel like the club would never not exercise it because they, for one, know what he brings to the table, has already done that for about 10 years. And he is a massive outlet for them financially as well. I think when you look at all those things combined, as well as him still performing to a decent level, maybe not the level some would expect, we'll touch on that later, but he still has a massive impact on the game, so I feel like that was always going to happen. And I do believe it's the right decision. It's only a 1-year deal. They still have time to assess it further during the next year, so I don't really see it as a bad thing.
The reservations some fans had in the Tottenham community and, the supporting side of the club, I think internally it was a no-brainer. People want Son to stay. Mm-hmm. He's a captain. He's our leader. Ange Postecoglou clearly rates him extremely highly. And even in the most recent press conference today, he was talking about the fact that if Son wants it to happen, it's going to happen because the club wants it to happen and he wants it to happen. Mm-hmm. There has been a stigma, though, Elias, that Son is a different type of player to the one that played under Maurizio Pochettino, Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, and that he doesn't have the same level of ability as he did. But the data seems to be implying otherwise, right? You did a bit of research on this.
Yeah, I went to a data website which has combined all the data, and I only looked at the Premier League games because I did feel like looking at, for example, Champions League season played in Champions League, season played in the Europa League, Conference League, or even without Europe, will give a different view on things because you don't play the same opposition. In the Premier League, you generally play the same opposition. And what I found was that Son actually still performs to the same levels as he used to, possibly even better. There are times when you look at, for example, taking on his man, dribbling past them, and his percentage of completion, as well as shots attempted, passes attempted, and completed. They are all kind of roughly the same as he did, but there are actually areas where he is doing better than the last few years. When you look at, for example, the shot creations he creates during a game, they're right now for this half season at 5.24 shot creations per 90 minutes, which is a massive improvement if you look at it from, for example, last season, where it was only 3.96. So he's creating more than a chance a game more at this time than he was last year, which I believe is a massively important metric to still show that he does improve the club when he plays, that he still offers a lot. He might not be that prolific anymore because he's expected goals, and his goals in general have slowed down, but he is creating more opportunities, and that's why he's also getting more assists.
Yeah, I find Son's comparisons over seasons can be difficult to nail on alone without context, though, because he's often seen as our deputy striker, and we're all quite open to the fact that he doesn't like playing as a centre forward. It doesn't particularly go to his strengths, but statistically his output is still actually quite strong in those roles. I mean, when you're looking at how many goals he's scoring and playing as a centre forward, he's still taking on the best strikers in the Premier League when it comes to goals per minutes on a ratio. And like you said, and under Ange, I think maybe it's often missed when you look at these statistics that he's ranking in the top 90th percentile in the Premier League for expected assisted goals and shot creating actions and passes attempted and passes completed and progressive passes. And he's in the top kind of 10% when it comes to progressive carries So he's contributing in other ways that perhaps as a fan we maybe don't notice so often. And a lot of his work is off the ball as well. But Elias, there's another area that Son's got looming over him, and that's his age. It's something none of us can escape. He's 33 in July. This contract takes him to 34. Ange Postecoglou said Son deserves to finish with a trophy at Spurs, and they'll be doing everything they can. Do you see Son as a key player as well for next season? Or do you see his role shifting and do Spurs need to maybe sign a different type of player who's going to be the starting player on that left wing? Or do you think it's still going to be Son's position and we're going to maybe take him off earlier in games to preserve his legs? Which approach would you say is the more sensible option for Spurs?
I feel like there's a case to be made for both arguments. I think that Son has been such a loyal servant to our club. He's been there through thick and thin. He stayed. He's had other opportunities to go, but he's wanted to create something at Tottenham. And I feel like that's a sentimental part which you shouldn't really let be an important factor, but certainly something that comes to mind. I do believe that we should look to sign a possible left winger, maybe someone with a bit of experience, not as young as some of the guys we've signed the last few years, who will, of course, get there. I do believe that. I think if you look at OhSoSpurs, for example, maybe Hjung Min Son will improve and become that player. But I think signing someone, let's say 24, 25 for the left wing spot and having them compete with Son next year could be a golden move, because you'd push Son to see, okay, how much do you still have in the tank, which I believe still is enough to contribute massively to the team, especially if we do get Europe, let's say, for example, via winning trophy or by a miraculous resurgence in the second half of the season. I feel like he will still play a part, but I don't think we can rely on him per se to start each game and to bring out the best Son we know every single game. I think that's something where the club should look at possibly acquiring another target.
Yes. I think the return of OhSoSpurs will also be a welcome addition. But even when I look at the stats of Wilson OhSoSpurs and compare him to Heung Min Son, and you should be able to see this on your screen if you're watching on the YouTube channel now, Son is still in a league of his own when it comes to creating opportunities and scoring goals. We all talk about the desire for this other option on the wing, which is the dribbly winger, but those players can look great when you look at them in highlights. However, I think we could take Jack Grealish maybe as an example of as an opposite type of player. You watch him and you go, wow, he always beats his man. He's so great on the eye. But if you ask a Manchester City fan who watches him every week, they go, well, he hasn't scored a goal in a year. So it's all well and good having that kind of passing the eye test, but you do also have to pass the stat test. You need a mix of the two, right?
And getting that mix of the two is very difficult, because I feel like Son has done that for numerous of years, backing up the eye test by performing on the data charts as well. This year he's still performing on the data charts as mentioned before, maybe even doing better, but the eye test doesn't correlate anymore with that. So I believe that it's a very difficult thing to find someone maybe to even fill in Son's boots, because he's been that important for the club. And I think he's put the bar at such a high level, a bit like Kane did when he left. Like, everybody was expecting someone to come in and immediately maybe fill his boots, but the connection they had, just very difficult. I feel like Solanke is doing a really good job this season as a very important player in the Ange system, but it did take a season to find somebody to actually maybe get near what Kane was offering. I feel like that could possibly be the same with Son, and I don't think the club should wait till Son maybe turns 35, 36 if he's still here, because at that time you're putting so much pressure on the new guy who comes in or is coming through to perform to the levels that Son has done. And I think if you get someone in maybe a bit earlier, they can work off each other and they might not have that pressure to be there straight away or perform to that level, because you still have Son here performing at a good level, as the data shows.
Yeah, agree. It's also, I feel, certain players, well, we know That certain players have received, like Son and Solanke, kind of this criticism over the course of the season that the outputs in terms of goals isn't what it should be. But there's a fair point to say that it's, if you put those players in a really well established team that's at a mature point where everything is cohesive. Should we just say Liverpool, because they're top of the league and they're flying and we're playing them later on in the semi-final. If you put Heung Min Son in that team, suddenly you'd probably go, wow, Sonny's back. You know, this guy's capable of 15, 20 goals a season. But at the moment, when you've got a team who have got one half-fit centre-back, so that whole back line is not cohesive as things stand, other players are having to adapt to help those players adapt, and that spreads through the whole team and through the whole pitch. Other players are having to do things they wouldn't naturally do. There's medium to long-term benefits for Tottenham. These players are going to come out of this period more developed with a more rounded game. But the short-term pain is these players aren't going to be able to just focus on what they're best at. And I think Son is one of those that's been, he's so, focused on what's best for the team. He's willing to sacrifice himself and his own performances. And he'll be doing things that people don't realise that are helping someone on the other flank, like Brennan Johnson perhaps, or Dominic Solanke, or a centre-back. But the trade, there's always a trade-off to every action like that. And that is, for him, he's having to sacrifice being in a position on the pitch that selfishly would get him in a better position for a goal. But he can't do that because we don't have adequate resources in other parts of the pitch, so he's having to sacrifice himself. And I think the stats show that he's doing so much more than just providing goals right now.
Yeah, that's true. And I also, if I can say one thing about it as well, I feel like due to the number of injuries, he's also not getting the rest that maybe he needs to have that amount of impact on the game, or maybe be the Son that people expected to see the last few years. Because if you every game have to give it your all, every time have to come back and defend, do the dirty work, you're not going to be maybe as flashy when trying to take on your man on the wings, etc. The stats still show that he does do that. I just feel like it might be further back on the pitch because he has to start further back due to the number of injuries we're having. So I feel like it's a situation where a lot of things come together, and it's difficult, I feel like, to say no, he will not get back to maybe the level on the eye test that we've seen from him. And I do really believe that if and when, hopefully when we get a fully cohesive, fit team, that we could go back to seeing the Son. Maybe a lot of people were expecting to see this.
Well, thank you, Elias, for joining us today. It's been a great chat about Heung Min Son. Exciting to have him extend his stay at Tottenham. Let's hope Spurs can get through the semi-final against Liverpool and that we can award him with a trophy, which he so deserves, in a Tottenham shirt. If you'd like to follow more of the content with Elias, make sure you subscribe. As I said before, he's an official journalist in Belgium, so he's following closely Alfie de Veen and Vuskovic. So we've got some exciting content on the way regarding some of our lonely players over there. But thank you very much, Elias, for joining.
No worries. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Up the Spurs.
Spurs.